Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Always fun.
So today we're going to be tackling the story of the Carroll A. Deering, kind of a ghost ship situation.
One of the all-time great maritime mysteries.
Exactly. Now, to set the scene, we're talking 1921.
Okay.
And way before GPS,
Right.
way before reliable long-distance radio,
hmm
and off the coast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, which has the nickname the Graveyard of the Atlantic.
Oh, yeah, for good reason.
So think about all those things, and then picture this. A five-masted schooner, found run aground,
Okay.
totally deserted, but the sails are set.
hmm
The galley has food in various states of preparation.
Mm.
So what happened? Where did the crew go? That's what we're here to figure
That's
out.
like a challenge. I love it.
So let's jump right in and talk about the Carroll A. Deering, the ship itself.
All right, so this was a five-masted schooner, as you said, one of
Yeah.
the last of her kind, built in 1919, so pretty new at the time,
Huh?
and just a magnificent example of wooden shipbuilding. These schooners were real workhorses designed for long hauls, carrying cargo across the oceans.
And this one in particular was named after the owner's son, Carroll Atwood Deering.
Yeah, there's a personal touch to this story right from the start. You can imagine the pride and the craftsmanship that went into building a ship named for your own child.
Definitely. So this is a ship with a history, even before this mysterious final voyage. Didn't it have kind of a close call during World War I?
It did. It's fascinating, actually. This very ship was sunk by a German U-boat during the war and then salvaged and brought back into service. It's almost like an omen, isn't it?
Little bit, right? Like this ship is no stranger to close calls, and yet here we are talking about another one.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder about fate and the sea and all those things.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the Deering's final voyage. So set the scene for us.
Okay, so July of 1920, she set sail from Norfolk, Virginia, heading for Rio de Janeiro. Big trip. And the captain, William H. Merritt, was himself a veteran, considered a bit of a hero because he had previously saved his crew when another Deering schooner he was captaining was also sunk by a German U-boat.
Wow, hold on. Another Deering schooner sunk by a U-boat.
Yeah, isn't that strange? Two ships, same name, same captain, both targeted by U-boats. It's an eerie coincidence.
Definitely makes you think. But this voyage wasn't destined to go smoothly either. What happened to Captain Merritt?
Well, he got sick quite seriously during the voyage.
Okay.
And of course, this is before the days of easy medical evacuations at sea, so they had to divert course to get him ashore, along with his son, who was serving as first mate.
Ah, so they needed to find a new captain.
They did. They found a guy in Delaware, a Captain Willis B. Wormel. He was 66 years old. A veteran seaman seemed qualified on paper, but maybe not the best fit for this particular crew, as it turned out.
66 seems a little bit old to be taking command of a transatlantic voyage at that time.
You'd think so, right? And there were some rumblings about him even then, besides his age.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, from what we know, Captain Wormel didn't exactly hit it off with his new crew. There were reports of friction, particularly with the first mate, Charles B. McClellan. And this is where it starts to get a little spooky. Witnesses in Barbados, where the Deering stopped for supplies.
Yeah.
They overheard McClellan making some pretty disturbing remarks.
What did he say?
Apparently, he was overheard saying, "I'll get the captain before we get to Norfolk."
Yikes.
Yeah, not exactly a vote of confidence, is it? Makes you wonder what was brewing beneath the surface there.
Definitely casts a shadow over everything that happened next. And remember, this is before the Deering even vanishes.
Exactly. We've got a ship with a history, a captain and crew who are not getting along, sailing through one of the most dangerous stretches of ocean in the world. The stage is set and the tension is building.
What happens next?
The Deering leaves Barbados and basically falls off the map. No word, no sightings, no communication for weeks.
Wow, just gone.
It's like she sailed straight into a mystery.
And this is 1921.
Yeah.
Remember, no GPS,
Yeah.
no easy way to track a ship.
Yeah, right. Finding a ship in the vast Atlantic back then was like finding a needle in a haystack, and for a while it seemed like the Deering was lost for good.
So what changed?
Well, on January 28th, 1921, there was a sighting, but it wasn't a happy reunion. It was something much stranger.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more what happened.
The Cape Lookout lightship off the coast of North Carolina reported seeing the Deering.
So they found her. Was everyone okay?
Well, that's just it. It wasn't a normal sighting. The lightship keeper reported some really odd details.
Like what? Give me the details.
Okay, so picture this. A man aboard the Deering hails the lightship and says they lost their anchors in a storm off Cape Fear. Seems plausible enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
But the lightship keeper, Captain Jacobson, noticed a few things that didn't add up.
Like what?
Well, first off, the man shouting didn't match the description of Captain Wormel or any of the officers. He was described as tall, thin, with a foreign accent, not the grizzled old sea captain that Wormel was supposed to be.
Okay, that's a little strange.
Right. And then Captain Jacobson also noticed that the crew were all huddled together on the forward part of the ship, an area where they weren't usually allowed. It was almost like they were being confined, kept under guard.
That is definitely creepy. Adds a whole other layer to this mystery.
Yeah.
So what happened next? Did anyone go investigate?
Well, not right away. Remember, communication was slow back then, and losing anchors in a storm wasn't completely unheard of. But then, get this, the next day, another ship spotted the Deering,
Yeah.
and they saw her sailing a course that would put her right onto Diamond Shoals,
Which is?
a notoriously dangerous area known for shifting sands, strong currents, shipwrecks, you name it. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, a ship seemingly sailing straight into a trap.
So did anyone try to warn them?
They tried to signal the Deering, but there was no response. It was like a ghost ship just sailing on, oblivious to the danger.
Okay, now I'm getting chills. This is seriously eerie. So what happened? Did the Deering run aground?
3 days later, on January 31st, a surfman at the Cape Hatteras Coast Guard station spotted the Deering hard aground on the Diamond Shoals, exactly as those earlier sightings had predicted.
So the ghost ship had finally run aground, and what did they find when they boarded the Deering?
Well, the seas were rough, so it took a few days for rescuers to reach the ship, but when they finally got there on February 4th, they found nobody.
Nobody. What about the crew? Any sign of a struggle?
That's the truly baffling part. The ship was in relatively good condition, but the scene was, well, eerie is the only word for it. The sails were set, but the steering gear was smashed, the wheel broken, the rudder detached. It's like they were trying to maneuver off the shoals, but failed.
Wow, that's a strange detail.
Right, and then down in the galley, food was still in pots on the stove as if they vanished mid-meal.
So they were preparing for the next day, not abandoning ship. This is getting stranger by the minute. What about the lifeboats?
Gone, both of them missing, along with the ship's log navigation equipment, the crew's personal belongings. It was as if they'd simply disappeared into thin air.
It's like they knew something was wrong, but didn't have time to react. This is incredible.
It's a real head-scratcher, isn't it? What happened in those crucial hours between that strange sighting at Cape Lookout and the grounding on Diamond Shoals? Where did the crew go? Why leave a ship seemingly ready to sail but with no one at the helm? These are the questions that investigators would wrestle with for years to come.
We've got a ghost ship, a missing crew, strange sightings, and more questions than answers. I'm hooked. Where do we go from here?
Well, buckle up, because next we're driving into the theories, and you won't believe some of the explanations people came up with to explain the disappearance of the Carroll A Deering.
Okay, so we left off with a pretty spooky scene aboard the Carroll A Deering.
Yeah, a ghost ship, if ever I saw one.
Exactly. And naturally, when something like this happens, people start coming up with explanations, theories, rumors.
Oh, of course, it's human nature to try and make sense of the unexplainable, especially when it involves something as mysterious as the sea.
Right. So what were some of the early theories about what happened to the Deering?
Well, you have to remember the time period in 1921, the world was still kind of recovering from World War I.
Right.
There were all these anxieties, about Bolsheviks and piracy, and Prohibition was in full swing. So there was this undercurrent of suspicion and intrigue.
So basically, it was the perfect breeding ground for a good mystery.
Oh, absolutely. And investigators had their hands full, sifting through all sorts of wild theories, some more plausible than others. Of course, natural disasters were considered the Atlantic in January. That's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, we've talked about the graveyard of the Atlantic. Could a storm have done this?
It was definitely one of the first things they looked into, but the evidence didn't really support it. The Deering was actually sailing away from the main storm track, not towards it.
Okay.
And the ship itself didn't show the kind of damage you'd expect from a major hurricane.
So if not a hurricane, then what? Did any of those more outlandish theories hold any weight?
Well, some people latched onto the idea of piracy. It had a certain romantic appeal, especially given the Deering's history with the U-boats during the war.
Right.
Some folks speculated that maybe a band of modern-day pirates operating out of the Caribbean or somewhere like that had targeted the ship.
But wouldn't there be signs of a struggle, damage from a fight, weapons left behind, something?
You'd think so, but there wasn't any of that. The Deering was remarkably intact, except for that damaged steering gear, and there was no trace of any pirates, no ransom demands, no messages, nothing.
So the pirate theory seems a little thin. What about communists? Was that a serious consideration?
Believe it or not, this was the height of the Red Scare. Remember, fears of communist infiltration were everywhere, and some officials were convinced that the Bolsheviks were behind the Deering's disappearance.
Really? They thought the communists were hijacking American ships.
Well, the theory was that they were trying to seize American ships and sail them to the Soviet Union, as a way to bolster their own fleet.
Wow, that seems like a pretty far-fetched idea. Did they have any evidence to support that?
Not really. It was mostly fueled by paranoia and speculation. They pointed to some vague documents that had been seized during a raid on a communist organization in New York. Supposedly, these documents urged members to target American ships, but there was no direct link to the Deering.
So we can probably rule out communist pirates as the culprits.
Yeah.
What about rum runners? Prohibition was in full swing. I imagine there was a lot of illegal activity happening at sea.
Oh, absolutely. And the rum running theory was definitely a popular one. The idea was that bootleggers might have hijacked the Deering to use for smuggling a ship that size could carry a fortune in illegal liquor.
That's an interesting idea, but wouldn't a five-masted schooner stick out like a sore thumb? Not exactly subtle for a smuggling operation.
You're right, it wouldn't be very discreet, and the Deering was pretty slow compared to the speedboats that rum runners often use. So while it's a fun theory, it's not very likely.
So we've ruled out hurricanes, pirates, communists, and rum runners. What's left? Did investigators have any other explanations?
Well, there was one theory that seemed to gain more traction than the others, and it centered on that conflict we talked about earlier between Captain Warmel and his crew, the theory of mutiny.
Ah, now this is starting to sound like a classic pirate tale. Tell me more about this mutiny theory. What made investigators think that the crew might have turned on their captain?
Remember those ominous words from the first mate McClellan back in Barbados? I'll get to captain before we get to Norfolk.
Yeah.
That, combined with all the reports of tension between Wormel and his crew, led some to believe that a mutiny might have taken place.
So the theory is that the crew led by McClellan overthrew Captain Ormel, took control of the ship, and then what? Where did they go? Why abandon the Deering?
That's the big question, isn't it? There's no logical reason why a mutinous crew would deliberately ground a perfectly good ship, especially without taking any supplies or the lifeboats.
Right, doesn't make sense. You'd think they'd want to escape with the ship, not wreck it.
Exactly, and there was no evidence of a fight on board, no signs of violence, so while the mutiny theory was popular for a while, it just didn't quite add up.
Okay, so we've gone through a whole list of theories, and nothing seems to fit perfectly. Did investigators consider anything, well, let's just say a little more out there?
Of course, no maritime mystery would be complete without at least a whisper of the paranormal.
Right.
And the Deering case is no exception. Some people speculated that maybe the ship had fallen victim to the Bermuda Triangle.
Ah, the Bermuda Triangle, that legendary region of the Atlantic where ships and planes mysteriously vanished. Was the Deering anywhere near the Bermuda Triangle?
Not really. The ship's last known location was actually quite a distance from the commonly accepted boundaries of the Bermuda Triangle, but that didn't stop people from weaving it into the narrative. Mysteries like this have a way of attracting those kinds of explanations.
It's like people need something to fill the void, even if it's just a fantastical story.
Exactly, especially when the truth is so elusive. And in the case of the Deering, the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. But that didn't mean investigators gave up. They continued to pore over the evidence, searching for any clue that might lead them to the missing crew.
So did they ever find any answers? Was there a breakthrough in the case?
Well, there was one piece of evidence that seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. A message in a bottle washed ashore a few months after the Deering was found, and the contents of that message sent shockwaves through the investigation.
A message in a bottle. Okay, now this is getting good. What did the message say?
Hold on tight, because this is where the story takes a truly unexpected turn. The message, which was supposedly written by the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, claimed that the Deering had been captured. It described an oil-burning vessel, possibly a pirate ship, overtaking the Deering, handcuffing the crew, and taking everything of value. It even urged the finder to notify the Deering Company headquarters.
Wow, so someone was claiming responsibility for the disappearance of the Deering. Did they ever find this mystery ship?
Well, that's the catch. This message in a bottle, while seemingly a major breakthrough, turned out to be a complete fabrication.
A fake. Who would do such a thing?
The man who claimed to have found the bottle, a fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray, confessed under questioning that he had made the whole thing up.
You're kidding? Why would he do that?
Apparently, he was hoping that finding such a sensational message would make him a local hero and increase his chances of landing a job at the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
Wow. Talk about an elaborate scheme for a job application.
It certainly was, and it just goes to show how much the mystery of the Deering had captured the public imagination. People were so eager for answers, so desperate to solve the puzzle, that they were willing to believe even the most outlandish tales.
So the message in a bottle was a dead end. Does that mean investigators were left with nothing but a bunch of theories and no real answers?
Not quite. While the more sensational theories were eventually dismissed, investigators did focus on a couple of explanations that seemed to fit the evidence better than the rest. And while we may never know for sure what happened to the crew of the Carroll A, during these remaining theories offer the most plausible scenarios based on what we know.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay it on me. What were these more plausible theories? Did investigators finally crack the case?
Well, let's just say they were able to narrow down the possibilities, but the final answer, the definitive solution to the mystery that remains elusive, it's up to each of us to weigh the evidence and decide what we believe happened to the Carroll A. Deering and her crew.
This is incredible. So many twists and turns. I can't wait to hear about those final theories and see if we can finally solve this century-old mystery. So we've gone through all sorts of theories about the Carroll A. Deering.
Yeah, from pirates to communists, even the Bermuda Triangle.
But if I'm remembering correctly, you said investigators eventually narrowed it down to a couple of explanations that seem the most likely.
Right. We gotta think like detectives here. Look at the scene. The sails were set, the steering gear was wrecked, they had lit distress signals. What does that tell you?
Sounds like they were trying to get away from something but couldn't control the ship.
Exactly. And think about where they were, Diamond Shoals. Those are notoriously difficult to navigate, constantly shifting strong currents. It would have been terrifying.
So maybe they panicked and decided to abandon ship in the lifeboats.
Could be. But then why light the distress signals? Wouldn't they have waited for rescuers if they thought they could?
Unless it was too dangerous to stay on board.
That's the thing. We have to factor in the conditions January in the Atlantic, freezing temperatures, rough seas. They might have thought the ship was breaking apart, that staying on board was a death sentence.
Makes sense in a horrible sort of way. And it would explain why neither the lifeboats nor the crew were ever found.
Sadly, yeah. A desperate gamble that seems to have failed. A crew already on edge from the conflict with the captain facing a terrifying situation and brutal weather. They decided to take their chances in the open ocean.
It really drives home just how unforgiving the sea can be. Are there any other explanations that fit the evidence?
There's one more, and this one involves the other ship we mentioned earlier, the Hewitts, a sulfur freighter that also disappeared around the same time.
Okay, how does the Hewitt tie into all of this?
Well, imagine this. The Hewitt is sailing nearby, sees the Deering's distress signals, and comes to their rescue standard procedure right. They take the Deering's crew on board, intending to get them to safety.
So the Deering's crew was rescued, but then they disappeared with the Hewitt.
Exactly. The Hewitt itself was lost at sea with all hands, no survivors, no wreckage ever found. So it's possible that the Deering's crew was rescued only to meet the same fate aboard the Hewitts, a double tragedy lost to the sea.
Wow, that's a heartbreaking thought. 2 ships, 2 crews, both gone without a trace.
It really highlights the mystery and the danger of seafaring in those days. We talked earlier about how we like to fill voids with stories, and that's what we're left with here. Possible scenarios, but no definitive answers.
So after all the investigations, the official conclusion was we just don't know.
The investigation was officially closed in 1922, unsolved. The Deering became a symbol of maritime mystery, and like so many of these tales, it captured the public's imagination precisely because it remained unexplained.
It's fascinating and frustrating at the same time, like a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah.
But, even without a clear solution, we've learned so much during this deep dive.
We have. It's been a journey through history, technology, and even human psychology. We've seen how a simple ghost ship story can reveal so much about our need to explain the unknown, our fascination with the sea's power, and the enduring allure of a good mystery.
Absolutely. What I find most fascinating is how these old cases, even without a neat ending, still resonate with us today. What do you think it is about the Deering story that continues to captivate people after all this time?
I think it's that mix of real-world events with that touch of the unexplained. We have a solid timeline, actual historical records, and then this gap where the crew vanishes. Our minds can't help but try to fill it in with possibilities. It speaks to our curiosity, our desire to make sense of things.
And maybe it's also a reminder that even in our modern world, with all our technology and advancements, there are still forces beyond our control. Mysteries that might never be fully solved.
Exactly. It keeps us humble, keeps us asking questions, keeps us exploring. The Carroll A. Deering might be a ghost ship, but her story keeps sailing on, inspiring us to learn more about the world, the sea, and ourselves.
That's a great point. I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this journey into the mystery of the Carroll A. Deering, we hope you enjoyed it, even if the destination remains shrouded in mystery.
And remember, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of adventure alive.
Until next time, fair winds and following seas.